I think the biggest CEO myth that's out there is that the CEO has to be this hard-driving, monolithic force in an organization. That rarely works and certainly doesn't work for long. What I've found is that the best leaders are those who are servant leaders. They're people who are humble, they are passionate about the work they're doing, and they're respectful of the people they work with and can motivate them to do the things that need to be done to bring success. We had a CEO for many years, and he was chairman of the board when I became CEO, my uncle, Robert McKell. And when he passed away a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to write a memorial for him in our employee newsletter. And what I shared really, I think, shares my feelings about being a CEO. Bob was the president of the company before we ever used the title CEO. But it reminded me, and this is what I wrote, that it reminded me of a quote I heard from John Maxwell. I was listening to him on the radio at one point, and he said something along, he was asked the question, who is the best CEO in the country from your perspective? And his answer was something along the lines of, I have no way of knowing who that is, because a good CEO is humble enough that they're not going to stand out to everybody else. So he said the best CEO is some leader of a small to medium-sized business somewhere out there in the country who's just quietly leading his organization in a manner that's caring and respectful and successful. And so I have no way of knowing who specifically that is. And my point to our employees was that Bob was exactly that kind of leader. He was among the best. The big change for us this year is that we were purchased in June by NovaCap. Our previous ownership didn't have the opportunity to put more equity into the business, and so we were somewhat capital constrained in our ability to grow the business. The big change going into 2019 is that we now have availability of capital, and we're able to build out into a number of markets and actually fulfill our vision of becoming the premier provider of broadband services throughout the state of Ohio and surrounding states. Our emphasis in 2019 will be our expansion into the Columbus market. The interesting thing is that we anticipated a lot of this when we originally built our network. We had the benefit of building our network as this bandwidth explosion had already started. And so we recognized that while the areas that we serve geographically had very little fiber available to them, that we needed to make sure we had a very robust network that we were putting out there. So we made sure that the network had lots of fibers available, had electronics that could be easily expanded, and that it was redundant, that it went through every county seat and was ringed and protected. And so because of that, we feel we're very well positioned to compete against incumbent providers who built their networks originally to either serve cable head ends or telco central offices. We believe we're better positioned to be able to meet the 5G demands of those markets. And even as we expand into new metropolitan markets, we're competing against companies that either built their networks for legacy purposes or built their networks by building to a customer and then extending to another and extending to another. As we go into these markets, we're building them with this purpose in mind from the beginning, to be able to meet the broadband needs of customers today and that expanded reliability, heavy broadband need of tomorrow. Yeah, we are in a feast or famine environment with fiber today. We have areas that have lots of it, and then we have areas that have very little of it. The challenge that we face in markets like many of those that we originally served at Horizon is that there is not a lot of fiber reaching out from the networks. We were able to produce an excellent middle mile network that reaches a tremendous number of businesses and enterprise customers. But the challenge remains of how do you reach the residential customers in those kinds of markets. And when you look at the geography of, for instance, southeastern Ohio, that's very difficult. And the difficulty proves itself in a situation like the calf auction that took place this summer, None of the markets that we serve had anybody take the CAF funds that were up for auction. And I think it's going to require public-private partnerships to be able to solve this problem in a creative manner, and trying to figure out a one-size-fits-all solution just isn't going to work. I would recommend that the FCC consider something like what they did with the rural healthcare pilot program, where they actually took a pool of funds and sought requests for how to best use those funds in some of the areas that weren't receiving them. We were able to start our build out because of one of those grants that became available to the healthcare providers in Southern Ohio. And I think if they were able to do the same thing with some of these residential markets, I think you'd find some creative solutions that communities working together with carriers would be able to come up with ways to provide, to meet those broadband needs of customers.